Pick the wrong god. That's what it comes down to. Used to be a lot of Eothas worshippers in Gilded Vale. Then one day, somebody named Waidwen shows up on Deerwood's doorstep. Says he's the living flesh of Eothas. Got an army with him. Suddenly, Eothas isn't so popular in these parts. After the war, people took to punishing Eothas worshippers, accusing them of treason. Got real ugly, especially after the legacy started. Folks needed someone to blame.
How far can a god go before even their own followers begin to question them? Are gods so different from mortals? And how can we distinguish between the powerful and the divine? The Saints' War is a very important series of events in the Pillars of Eternity universe. We'll be going through the events of the Saints' War chronologically, from the incidents that led up to it, to individual battles, to the eventual end of the war. If there is a specific part of the Saints' War that interests you, there are timestamps included in the video for you to choose from. This video will contain foundational lore, but as it continues, will of course contain spoilers for Pillars 1 and 2, and Avowed, and any other entries in the series going forward. You have been warned. The Saints' War took place between the years of 2807 and 2808 AI between the nations of the Palatinate of the Deerwood and the Divine Kingdom of Waidwen. Both of these nations lie near one another on the continent of the Eastern Reach. Both nations also were former colonies of the Adiran Empire. The Deerwood was founded anywhere from 2602 to 2622, and Waidwen around 2643. Waidwen was founded specifically by a group of economically depressed Eothas worshippers who had been growing increasingly agitated with their state of affairs in the empire. The Adiran Emperor determined that a new colony would be a good chance for them to get back on their feet. He offered land grants and funds so generous that the Eothasians couldn't refuse. So then, Waidwen was established north of the Deerwood and would serve as farmland for verdant Vorlis plants, which were important due to the fact that they produced purple dye. A cool connection to the real world is that purple dye was often sought after and associated with royalty, since it was hard to produce in ancient times. Unfortunately, the crops would eventually fail in Waidwen, leading to a major economic decline for the farming population. Adir promised to send resupply ships to aid their colonial settlement, but the Waidwen state of affairs degenerated even further when those ships never came. The Empire of Adir seemed detached from the needs of the Waidwen citizens at this point, and Waidwen had fallen on dark days. They eventually tried to expand into the Ashamadal Plains to their north, but were stopped easily by a barbarian named Bleska, who united the tribes of the Ashamadal long enough to stop further Waidwen advances. If anyone is familiar with Roman history in Gaul, you'll recognize this as another real-world connection, this time to Vercingetorix and Boudica-type figures. So needless to say, Waidwen was having problems. Checking back on the Deerwood, from its founding in the early 2600s, the Deerwood had managed to break free from Adiran influence in 2672 AI through various wars that we needn't get into right now. Regardless, they had become their own independent nation, referred to as the Free Palatinate of the Deerwood, and the strong-minded folk of this land were doing just fine on their own. Flashing back to Waidwen, during this period of economic downfall, there was a man who rose above all others. A farmer named Waidwen. Waidwen had a complicated background. He and his father did not get along, mostly due to Waidwen's inquisitive mind. He liked to muse about what the world would be like if there were no gods, or if it was right that men and women thank the gods for the work that they did. You have to remember, though, Waidwen was a pious place, founded by followers of the God of Light, and Waidwen's father was no exception to the piety. He often met Waidwen's thoughts with beatings when these questions came up. Not much is known about Waidwen's mother, but when his father died from the Vorlis cough, Waidwen considered it a liberation more than anything. He was, at his core, a simple man in his work, though. After his parents' deaths, he continued to till the fields and bring his crop of Vorlis to the main town for selling. While in town, Waidwen reportedly saw countless criminals sentenced and executed during the economic turmoil. One day in Waidwen's life was more important than any other, however. It was the day that Eothas himself, the god of light and renewal, appeared to him. Eothas appeared to Waidwen one day as he was finishing his work on the farm. The god of light asked Waidwen to, more or less, team up.
I'm thinking maybe you and I could partner up.
Eothas offered Waidwen the chance to help rebuild an empire by becoming the living embodiment of the deity, a vessel for his divine power. Waidwen accepted. Soon after their convergence, Eothas and Waidwen bonded with one another. Waidwen began preaching in the town square. This wasn't an unusual thing for folks to do, but what was unusual was that people actually listened to Waidwen. They felt a connection with his words. What Eothas had told the young man was that Waidwen was being punished. Punished for their lack of piety in Eothas, and their devotion and reliance on the Adiran Empire and their governor for support. Naturally, the Adirans didn't take too well to this message. At this point, no one could tell what Waidwen was precisely, but the government feared his message, and it struck a chord with the devout civilians of Waidwen who had been through much in the past few years. Waidwen, the whole time, claimed that all of his revelations were revealed to him by Eothas via the dawn stars, not that Waidwen was himself a vessel for the god. The government was at a difficult point. They didn't want to imprison the man for fear of inciting a rebellion, but if they said nothing, they would be perceived as soft, opening gateways for more wild preachers and ideologies in the future. They opted to try and discredit and humiliate him instead, to shake the faith of his followers. During Waidwen's most well-attended sermon, he was accosted by the town guard, who erected a pillory, placing Waidwen inside as they began to recite a list of false accusations toward him, after which a brief hearing was held, where an infliction of 30 lashes was proclaimed to be his punishment. Waidwen's followers were beside themselves with rage, but Waidwen insisted that the guard follow through on their punishment. Waidwen was met with only 5 lashes before the guard stopped. Something strange was happening. He never screamed, and every lash of the whip that struck Waidwen's back proceeded to open up a flash of light from the farmer's skin. The colonial secretary attempted to stop the punishment early, but it was Waidwen, in a voice that sounded not his own, who insisted that he receive the whole 30. Upon receiving the final lash, white light erupted from Waidwen's back and engulfed his head in a flaming crown. He stood up, the chains falling from his arms in molten pieces, the pillory broken. With the full attention of the colony, the thing that was Waidwen finished his speech. He called for the people to rise up, not as a mob, but as pilgrims tasked with delivering the bloody will of the divine. This event is referred to as the miracle of the Verdant Vorlis. After the miracle, Waidwen began to amass a following, a large following. He was seen as a prophet of Eothas, and within days, he was able to approach the imperial governor with a small army of loyal Eothasians and Waidwen. Upon approaching the governor, Waidwen's body became inhuman, luminescent. His head became a flash of blinding light. The governor was forced to stand down in the wake of the divine power being demonstrated before him, and he relinquished his authority to Waidwen, who became the first and the only divine king of the now divine kingdom of Waidwen. Waidwen's rule was uncontested. The people of Waidwen saw themselves as blessed that their god personally descended upon them as a leader. But Waidwen's rule became controversial very quickly. Waidwen soon began punishing the allies of the Old Empire, and afterwards, he targeted corrupt churches or church leaders of Eothas. He considered them the poison of the world. Scrutiny escalated against the Divine King, and with it, the Divine King's scrutiny towards his faithful escalated as well. Soon, simple worshippers of Eothas were being punished for mere perceptions of heresy. Members of other religions were also added to the list of the persecuted for following different faiths. Berethians, the followers of Bereth; Wudikans, followers of Wudica; Magranic priests, followers of Magran. People who had caused Waidwen no strife were being punished. This, for many people of Raed Saris, was the straw that broke the camel's back.
My brother Woden and me, neither of us believed it. No way was that Eothas.
How could Waidwen truly be an avatar of Eothas when he was committing such horrible atrocities? He must be a pretender, some thought. This must be some cruel trick. Many Eothasians were torn on the matter and turned against Waidwen after his atrocities against other faiths. Large segments of the population began to flee from Raed Saris to the Dyrwood, begging for sanctuary. And all this time, the people of the Dyrwood had been aware of Waidwen, skeptical. And now they were feeling the effect of the Divine King's iron rule in their own home. The people of the Dyrwood knew that they could not sustain explosive population growth to their country if Waidwen's rule were to continue unchecked. This causes problems for both nations. Dyrwoodans also feared that Waidwen's attention would turn from Raed Saris and land on them next if nothing was done. And the Dyrwoodans were right in this fear. Not far after the migrations, Waidwen moved on the Dyrwood, and war ensued. So finally we get to the actual Saints' War proper, named after Waidwen, whom the Raed Sarans began calling Saint Waidwen, so the Saints' War. Waidwen personally led many of the battles on behalf of Raed Saris, displaying his godlike power by disintegrating his enemies with beams of blinding white light. The first stop on Waidwen's path of destruction was the city of Cold Morn. Cold Morn sits at the northern frontier of the White March and has since become an infamous location throughout the Eastern Reach. Cold Morn, upon sighting the Raed Saran army, offered unconditional surrender to the Horde. The Raed Saran army continued past Cold Morn to another city in the White March known as Mercy Vale. Unlike Cold Morn, Mercy Vale refused to surrender to Waidwen. The Raed Sarans sacked the town. As a result, Mercy Vale is seen as a town full of heroes, while Cold Morn is still detested to this day. While Eothas was running rampant with his army of zealots, there was another god intending to stop him. There are 11 gods of Eora, and none of them knew exactly what Eothas' intentions were in storming the gates of the Dyrwood, but needless to say, his and Waidwen's actions startled them. Magrin, the goddess of fire, war, and trials, revealed to 12 of her Magranic priests, 7 men and 5 women, the secrets of how to build a weapon powerful enough to kill Waidwen. A bomb. The bomb was built in Ashfall, and the priests powered this weapon using pieces of their own souls, infused with the hatred they held for Eothas and Waidwen. A part of Waidwen's soul was used in the construction of the bomb as well. These dozen, as the Magranic priests would become known, hid the bomb at Halgot Citadel. Halgot was a prime location for the weapon to be stored, since it was a large Dyrwooden fortress on the border with Raed Saris. If Waidwen wanted to make his way into the Dyrwood, he would have to go through Halgot Citadel and cross the now infamous Evon Dewar Bridge. This bridge is the precise place that the bomb was hidden under, and was an excellent choke point to capture the avatar of Eothas at. The idea was that when Waidwen walked across the bridge and wound up above the bomb, the Godhammer would trigger. Many of the dozen gave their lives defending against the Raed Sarans on the bridge, and stalled Waidwen just long enough for the bomb to be primed. The Godhammer, the bridge, the Raed Sarans, the dozen, and of course Waidwen, all erupted in a brutal amalgam of flame, stone, and soul. The remaining Raed Sarans were easily defeated, in awe at the blast that had devoured Saint Waidwen. Halgot Citadel, in honor of the battle, was renamed to Godhammer Citadel. And thus was the fiery conclusion to the Saints' War.
Truth, it wasn't even a war. It was a cautionary tale about pride. Specifically, Waidwen's pride. He should have stayed a farmer.
There was now a lasting resentment toward Eothas worshippers throughout the Dyrwood. Though Waidwen was gone, the god remained in some capacity, and thus his worshippers did too. You have to remember that not everyone believed Waidwen to be an avatar of Eothas. These people were not privy to information in the same way that you and I are. And so as a result of the Saints' War, horrible atrocities were committed against Eothas worshippers following the Godhammer's explosion, known simply as the Purges.
We started saving the Eothasians from themselves, burning any that didn't die with their god. Heresy in Raed Ceres is one thing. Heresy here in the Deerwood comes with a more personal touch. As I see it, every Eothasian who still lives in the Deerwood puts the nation at risk, is another dagger held to the throat of our faith. Root them out, burn them, or send them back to Raed Ceres to wallow in the blood of their failure.
Homes were set on fire and temples to Eothas were destroyed, their followers murdered. The city of Coldmourne was the first town to see violence, as many condemned their citizens for not opposing the Raed Ceres army when it arrived from the White March. Typically, these crazed lynch mobs were led by Magranic priests, who claimed that it was the will of Magran to destroy the Eothasian worshippers. But the consequences of the Saints' War did not end there, at least not in the eyes of the public. In the year 2809, less than 1 year after the end of the Saints' War, the first Hollowborn child was recorded. A Hollowborn is a child born without a soul. Rather than crying or screaming, as most babies would, Hollowborns do not much more than stare into the distance, more akin to a breathing husk than a living being. More and more Hollowborn children were reported in the following days, weeks, months, and years. Many claimed that this was punishment for the Deerwoodans killing a god, and the curse of the Hollowborn was dubbed Waidwen's legacy by many folk throughout the Deerwood. Soon, animancers in Defiance Bay discovered what was believed to be a cure for the soulless children, though they were pressured into doing so quickly via confusion and outrage of the parents of these Hollowborn children. And you may be wondering, what is an animancer? Well, animancy is the study of souls, so animancers are those who study souls. See, souls are very important in the Pillars of Eternity universe, and their study is, in fact, an entire branch of science in these games. So it's very important to understand what this term means and its place within the Saints' War. Animancers in the Brackenberry Sanitarium discovered that by transplanting an animal's soul into a Hollowborn child, they were able to simulate basic personalities and instincts into these hollowed children. Many animancers rejected this so-called cure, but nonetheless, it was better than nothing for many people, and thus was dubbed the Salvation. However, it was found out that upon hitting puberty, the saved, the Hollowborn who'd had animal souls transplanted, they all went feral, turning into creatures known as Wicts. Many parents were forced to kill their own children due to the Salvation, and this increased tensions drastically between animancers and the general public in the Eastern Reach. And again, many people saw the Hollowborn as a direct result of Eothas and Waidwen's destruction at Halgot Citadel. Waidwen's legacy is the last direct event from the Saints' War in Waidwen's name. And now that you know the complete backstory of the war, let's talk about intentions. Now for many, this did seem out of character for Eothas, the god of light and renewal, but there was a motive behind the scenes. And although I gave a spoiler warning at the beginning, I will give you another spoiler warning here for those of you who have not completed Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. Everything that we discussed previously here is pre-established lore before the games, but we will now be getting into the plot lines of both Pillars 1 and 2. So with that out of the way, there's something we need to discuss about the gods of Eora. These gods are not natural gods, as in, they were created. They were synthesized. The ancient society of Engwithan was plagued by many religious wars during their time, you see. Engwithan sought to end these conflicts. While researching gods through various means, animancy chief among them, they discovered that there were none, or at the very least, if there had been a god or gods that created the universe, they were now gone. Therefore, all of the deities worshipped in their time were false idols and fabrications. The Engwithans were perplexed by their discovery, but it was undeniable. There were no gods. So they set upon creating deities themselves. They figured that with everyone worshipping the same pantheon, the religious wars and disagreements would come to an end, and these new gods would provide guidance to a savage people, at least as Boudica puts it. Constructing these gods would be no easy task, however. The Engwithans began constructing machines across the land capable of harnessing souls. Using a specific machine in a site known as Sun in Shadow, they used thousands of Engwithan souls to ascend into godhood, killing their hosts immediately. This is the basics of what happened, and since this is supposed to be a video specifically on the Saints' War, I won't go into it too much more, but essentially, this is the best kept secret on Eora. A group known as the Leaden Key was paramount in keeping this secret, and their leader, Theos Ix Arcanon, an Engwithan himself, had led the group for thousands of years, having his soul reincarnated with all his memories every time that he died due to him being the champion of Boudica. With the Engwithan society gone, the Leaden Key's prime function was to ensure that the people of Eora never discovered their secret, and to stomp out anything that could dissuade people from the true nature of the gods. The gods then used Titans to influence their will on Kith in the early years of their apotheosis, and each of them, save Scan, was crafted from an ideal, intended to give meaning to the lives of mortals, and their personalities were shaped by these ideals. They helped shape society for years after their ascension, but Eothas had eventually grown tired of this secret. He thought that it was time to expose the gods for what they were. He wanted the Kith to stand together, united without their gods, and he believed it possible, no matter how far-fetched the other gods perceived his mission. So when Eothas merged with Waidwen and brought his army through the Dyrwood, he was attempting to march on Twin Elms to expose the machinery used at Sun and Shadow. But when presented with the Godhammer bomb at Evon Dewar, he realized that Waidwen's immolation could serve a similar function at spreading doubt in the power of the gods. Also, the Curse of the Hollowborn had nothing to do with Waidwen or Eothas. It was the Leaden Key who, using old Engwithan soul machinery, halted the flow of souls throughout the Dyrwood. They staged an event to make animancers look bad because, with how far advanced animancy was becoming in the Dyrwood, the Leaden Key became worried that soon they would discover the god's secret. Also, the dozen who created the Godhammer bomb were in fact inspired by Magrin, and there was some sort of collaboration between her and Boudica during this time, though the details are vague. In 2823 AI, the souls that Theos halted were dealt with, and children returned to being born with proper souls in the Dyrwood. However, by the year 2828 AI, roughly 5 years later, Eothas returned.
I used to dream that when my God came back, he would forgive us. Last the trouble of dreams. Sooner or later, we all have to wake up.
Rather than using a Kith as his vessel this time, he merged with a gigantic statue comprised of Adra, created in the visage of Maros Nua, the son of Ad Nua, an old Engwithan who became obsessed with animancy after the death of his aforementioned heir. Eothas believed, with his now reformed godly soul, that he did not go far enough with the Saints' War, and as a result, he used the Colossus to march to the old Engwithan site of Ukaizo this time in the Deadfire Archipelago. Ukaizo is a drastically important Engwithan site because it houses the control over what is referred to as the Wheel.
Eora, a world where mortals live, die, and are reborn through the turning of the wheel. The cycle of reincarnation watched over by the gods, and made possible through pillars of a mystical substance known as Adra.
The Wheel in Eora is a phenomenon which recycles souls into new beings. The Engwithans, before ascending to godhood, built a machine in Ukaizo with the local Almawa people, the Huana, which acted as a dam for souls, essentially. This machine would send souls to a place known as the Beyond, which is of course where the gods reside, allowing the Engwithan gods control over these souls. Berith, for example, is basically in charge of the wheel, seeing as they are the god of cycles and death. Eothas marched to Ukaizo with the intention of destroying the machine that flowed the souls into the beyond. Though there was much destruction in his wake, Eothas again was acting, in his eyes, on behalf of Kith. For too long the gods had controlled the fates of mortal lives, and Eothas saw it as his duty to destroy the wheel once and for all, to diminish the role of the gods and elevate the roles of Kith. The fate of the world of Eora is uncertain, as this is the ending of Pillars 2, and we have yet to get a sequel on the canon version of events, if ever there will be one. The player character can convince Eothas of a number of different endings, but the main follow-through is that the machine at Ukaizo is always inevitably destroyed. Eothas believes that this fight to regain the flow of souls will reunite the factions of the world to a common cause and make Kith reliant on each other rather than the gods. So now you have the full picture of the Saints' War and its consequences, of Eothas' intentions and Waidwen's purpose in it all. We've learned about the Engwithans, the gods, and their secrecy. What you do with this information is up to you. If you have made it this far into this video, thank you very much. If you've never played these games before, I would consider giving the Pillars universe a chance, as it's a close second with Elder Scrolls for me in terms of fantasy, due to the excellent story, characters, and choices, which, honestly, Elder Scrolls tends to lack. The attention to details alone allows for a much more engaging narrative, and the people in this world tend to feel a bit more realistic than other games I play. I thought this would be a good time to get this video out too, since Avowed just came out, which is an extension of the Pillars of Eternity world of Eora. And, as always, I would love to give a special shout out to my channel members who make the work done at this channel possible by just donating a small amount of their monthly income to support the work done here. So, without further ado, special thank you to Hass, Braden Thompson, Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak, that's a big one, Zickard, Skooma Addict, Rushfan217, Luke, Gary Combine, Ilya J, Friendly Trevor 95, To The Max, Alex McLaren, One Time I Punched a Dolphin, Sterling Butte Curcio, Brave Fen, Arthur Colpani da Silva, HS Crimson, Drake Butler, Chad Clayton, Calorie Darkness, Celise, Silver Balls, Cintola, Ina the Khajiit, Peace, Sophie, British Rogue, Thin White Duke, Sequencer, Sir Ragu III, Brendao Almeida Santos, Marcus Strangle, Omo, Jacob Waymo 22, Abby Normal, Faust Lament, The Chosen J, Alexis, Ranger McKay, Breezy Stratton, Jake A.S., Soulless Saint, TJ, Ophelia Drowning, Naji aka Tracy, Jug, Aaron Dobbs, Dishonored Pro 3500, OOP, Joel Evers, Debash, and Inherent Man X. Thank you guys all so much, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.